Hello and welcome to the Practical Leadership Podcast, where leaders share their tools and practical advice to make you a better leader today. Today, I have a guest who's the person you need to know if you are in business. He is a business lawyer, advisor, an entrepreneur. He is the guy that will help you figure out how to set up your entity well, how to do things right. He'll provide you strategic advice, anywhere from purchasing, partnering, selling your business. If you're in business, you should have an aspiration to either acquire or to sell, right? He'll help with anything business related. As you grow your businesses, they tend to get more complex. They require more and better structure. He's a man for the job. He's a managing partner at Dykema, San Antonio, a graduate from Notre Dame. He's an advisor to nonprofits. He is an involved member of the business community. I can go on. I met you at ACG. It's been a great, wonderful organization. Past president of it, building great relationships with people in the community, serving the mid-market. I can go on, but Nick, so happy to have you on the podcast today.
Thanks, Max. It's great to be here.
I'm sure I missed a few accolades, but we'll keep going from there. Nick, so before we get started, what is something good, positive, happy that's been happening in your world lately?
Yeah, well, business is picking back up. I do quite a bit of M&A work. And, towards the beginning of the year, there was a lot of uncertainty in the market, particularly when you saw banks that were on fragile ground. And, fortunately, it seems like the market's got its feet under it, and it's got its feet under rising interest rates for the most part, at least in the space that I work in. And so it's nice to see that buyers have sort of adjusted to that and they're getting back to making deals. And so that's been very positive.
It's not surprising, right, that you kind of go to the business side and the positive side of, like, I know you're so passionate about it. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you guys tend to be like a leading indicator of what's happening in the business world, in the business community. Like whatever you see is kind of what's happening.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. On the M&A side, we figure it out really quickly when things are slowing down because there's just not as much deal activity. And a lot of the stuff that we do is preliminary to the announcement of a transaction. We're involved in the letter of intent phase, for instance. And so when you see that slowing down, it does sort of feel like things are changing in the economy. We can also feel it when things are picking back up, when deals are happening again. We get a little bit of a leading indicator for that. We're a general practice law firm, Dykema. And so we have, my partners and my colleagues in different practice areas, bankruptcy, for instance, labor and employment. So when things are changing in the economy, we have different leading indicators in all those spaces.
So Nick, I have a bunch of questions for you, and this podcast is about leadership. And one of the things that I really like about like your leadership is not just your leadership like in the community or with groups. I've seen firsthand how easy it is to relate with you, how much you look for other people's interest, but you're also like a leader in the San Antonio office. You're a leader when you're working on deals and relationships, right? Like you're driving them and advising and working with other people, and it's a different perspective, because as an advisor, many times I'm like kind of a little bit on the sideline coaching, but you also get to see things kind of, you've got to work with the owners, the CEOs, individuals. You help with the long-term vision of what they want to do from a perspective that is very different than mine. It's about how to structure it correctly. I'm on the kind of like, okay, how do we get the most value for it before we get to you? And then you're like, okay, then we take that to the next level. So we'll get into that. But I always like to ask, where did you first learn about the concept of leadership? Where did that like pop up in your world?
Yeah, I think it's really helpful when you have jobs early in your life, not necessarily the professional career that you land in, but I was always really fortunate to have opportunities to work with good people, even when I was a kid. Working at country clubs when I grew up, and then after college, before law school, I worked with some of the larger banks. And, it was always nice to see different leadership styles, even in those jobs when I was starting out, because it helped me see what I liked and what I didn't like. And then when I was picking a law firm coming out of law school, I sort of knew the kind of culture I was looking for. And I was really fortunate to join our firm here. We had been around, our office has been around since 1939. We're going to be celebrating 85 years in San Antonio next year. And the leaders that I was exposed to here were really selfless leaders. They really put the firm first. And when they were making decisions, they were making decisions, what's best for the office, what's best for the firm, not necessarily what's best for the partners, but what's the right thing to do. And so I was very fortunate that we've had some wonderful leaders here that I got to learn from. But I think you can learn even when you're a teenager, kind of working your first jobs and seeing how to relate to people, how to communicate with people, and just kind of gaining some empathy kind of early.
Yeah, empathy, not necessarily the word I expect to hear from attorneys, right? Uh, there's the stereotypes, except, well, business attorneys are maybe a little bit different because they have to understand a little bit about the business side of things and the people side of things.
You're right. And you kind of nailed it. I think what you were driving at just a few minutes ago, you're talking about, certain lawyers, certain other professionals have a transactional approach to their client relationships. They kind of view it as a one-off transaction or maybe multiple transactions. But I think the really, really effective lawyers, the really effective trusted advisors, they're looking at it from a relationship standpoint, and they're trying to build something long-term. And you end up caring about your clients quite a bit through that process. And it's helpful to try to see the transaction through their eyes, kind of what they're going through. You'll never fully understand it unless you're also an entrepreneur yourself. But I think that it's a really helpful skill for a professional advisor to develop early. Try to be that trusted advisor role.
So let's talk a little bit about that trusted advisor. When I fully committed to doing what I do for a living now, that was actually one of the first books I read. Becoming a trusted advisor, because to me it's like, well, of course you're in there, you're talking to people, you're connecting. You got to know them really well to be able to help them the best possible. You can't just look at numbers coldly, because there's people behind it. So my job is actually a little bit different, because I get to spend a lot of time with the CEOs, the owners, and for a long period of time, right? Yes, I have, some engagements that are maybe 6 months or a year, but for the most part, I work with them 3, 4, 5, 6 years. So I get to build relationships, but it's almost like part of the deal. But how do you build a relationship when somebody like shows up? We got to get this deal done.
Yeah.
And you got to expedite the being a trusted advisor. Like, how does that happen?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it starts by, finding a way to relate with your clients. Sometimes you have to do that on an expedited basis. But fortunately, when those transactions happen, sometimes you know the people beforehand. Perhaps you've kind of got to know them before. But if not, you get to know each other pretty quickly because you're on the phone all the time, multiple times a day, and you're sort of in the foxhole together with a shared struggle. And I think that when you have that and you're both rowing in the same direction, you can build that trust pretty quickly. That's not the optimal way to do it. Right? You have some clients. I've been practicing law for over 13 years, and I have some clients that I've worked with for over a decade. You're never going to get to that level of client relationship in a 3-month, 4-month, 5-month quick engagement, but you can come pretty close. And it's fulfilling to do that because you really care about what they're doing. If they're selling their business, you want to make sure that you do that in a way that protects them so that they can kind of go off in the sunset, and you keep up with them too afterwards. So it's a really fulfilling part. Not ideal to have to do that quickly, but you can do it because it's such an intense process.
I think that you've got a few things going for you, if I may say so, right? So, being part of the community, being well known, recognized, having a great reputation, being part of a firm that also has a good reputation. I think that kind of, because again, people that don't know you that might be watching this they can quickly really get a sense of your demeanor, but you're just someone that it's so easy to feel comfortable with. I don't know what it is about you, Nick, but it is, right? And I know that every conversation we've ever had, you always really start by asking me about my world, my life, things that I care about. And you are people first, it seems to me.
I think to do anything effectively, you have to be authentic. you can't fake this stuff over a long period of time, and you shouldn't want to. But I think it's a great skill to have, whatever job you're in, to really care about people and enjoy getting to know them and really liking people. I found that bumping into other professionals, you can kind of tell the ones that are more technical oriented and that's their sole focus, and it's almost like maybe they don't enjoy being around people at all. But I've always really enjoyed getting to know the people in our community, and it's a small enough town in San Antonio to where you can still do that. And so I appreciate that, Max. It's been nice getting to know you as well. And ACG has been really great for that. We've had an opportunity to get to know each other and also meet some other outstanding people. And as you keep coming back and back, it's great to get to build those relationships.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Going back to the client part, I always tell my clients when we're discovering core customer, right? Like who should we really be considering as key to our business, to our growth, etc. You got to love the client, right? Like you've got to love the client. You got to have to be an advocate for them, want the best for them. If you don't love your client, you shouldn't have them as a client. And I really believe that, you sleep, eat, and breathe kind of like your client in the mergers and acquisitions, in those opportunities that they kind of, like I see the eyes light up when there's conversations around that. So that is very cool. One more thing I want to share, and then I'll let you comment on this, which is just an interesting bit, that relationships are a combination of number of interactions, duration of the interaction, but the intensity of the interaction. So, man, when you're probably working on a purchase or on a sale, there's a lot of excitement. I can imagine, like, the adrenaline, the stress, the like all this heightened level of emotion, which might also be a good relationship. I mean, I wouldn't doubt if these people become your lifelong friends after, right?
We've had that before, and it's great to get to keep up with people after they've sold. And transactions, even ones where everybody is very friendly with each other and is looking for the long term, they can still be a roller coaster as you go through it. There's just something about the nature of deals. And so there's a lot of seeing people at their highs, seeing people when they're at their most stressed. But I really think that there's something about just kind of sharing that experience together and just trying to be helpful to them as they're going through that. It really has a way of building a pretty strong bond.
Yeah. So let's shift it over to working with like people and working with groups. Let's start just with your business, right? Like the one that you manage. What's your your philosophy, your mindset, your approach? I mean, you're working with people that have very high technical skills, intelligent, well educated. And for those of you that don't know, those are the most difficult people to work with. And I kind of say that half jokingly, but there's some truth to it, right? Like, I mean, it's different, every type of a team member is different, but I like to joke that sometimes they are the most challenging. So what's your approach? Like, how do you work with these people? Like, again, capable, technical, educated. What's your philosophy, your approach, your mindset?
Yeah, well, just to set the background a little bit of our office here for context, we have over 100 people that work in our office, and 54 of them, including myself, are attorneys. And then we also have a number of people that are non-attorney professionals here, including legal assistants, finance and accounting folk, people from all across the board, all with kind of unique backgrounds and experiences. And so I think the first thing to kind of understand is not everyone's going to be the same when you're dealing with that sort of a variety. I was very fortunate. I've been practicing here in this office my whole career, so that really helps to build trust with people. But I think that my role as the leader of a law firm, I have part of a law office. I've got partners that do have a lot of influence, a lot of skill. I certainly don't look at it as being their boss. I look at it as being the person that tries to hold the team together, make sure we're going in the same direction on strategy. I view myself in many ways as a teacher and just trying to help people reach their potential, whether they're a new lawyer starting out, whether they're a non-lawyer professional that has goals, or maybe they're even senior in their career and they're just trying to have a very fulfilling, last few years of practice. I see myself as a resource to make sure they're having a good experience and that we're all working together from a strategy standpoint. I think to influence people, you have to be able to relate with them really well. And so spending time together to understand kind of where they're coming from is really important. And I think that helps build trust. And I think only once you have that trust, you can try to kind of influence the path that you think is the right path. And I think it's very similar to working with clients. A lot of times, you don't want to come off as somebody that's trying to have kind of a command control mentality at all. I work with really successful people that have accomplished a lot. And so building trust, relating, and then once you're in that point, you can try to influence a little bit the direction. But I'm fortunate that I work with really wonderful people here. It makes it really easy.
So we're going to probably have to talk about the hiring and how you guys do it, because like, it's awesome to hear that you feel very highly about the team and the people that you have, and I'm sure you've been a huge influence in making that happen. So before we get into some of the details on what you just shared, again, I'm curious to understand, how did these ideas form? Was it experience? Was it reading? Was it training? Was it a combination? Is it just in your nature? How did you realize that that's the right approach?
Yeah, it probably is a bit in my nature, but I've always read quite a bit. I'm always reading. That's always been really helpful to me. And I've read books on business and leadership, and that you can get gems from that. My firm really is a wonderful place if you want to develop. They just sent myself and a group of my other partners to Northwestern University, the Kellogg School of Business, to do leadership training, which is wonderful. And I've always just tried to take advantage of those opportunities whenever they arose. I worked a number of jobs when I was a kid. I always learned from those how you like to be treated, how you don't like to be treated, how to work with a wide variety of different kinds of people. It was all very helpful. And I do think at some point, some people are just kind of more naturally inclined to be better working with people, but that's primarily how I see my role from a leadership standpoint. It's just the ability to work well with people and try to make sure they're motivated and working towards good firm goals.
You used the key word, motivated. Let's talk about that. I don't know if you're familiar with Andy Grove over at Intel, high output management.
Oh, yep, that's right.
So, in his opinion, it's like one of the two things that you have to do as a manager is educate and motivate. So how do you motivate?
Yeah, it's different. It's different for different people. When I'm talking to a young lawyer, just as an example, somebody that's just kind of starting in the practice, what I try to advise them on is it can be a really wonderful and fulfilling career if you can develop yourself as an attorney. And so I try to see what makes them tick. Many people enjoy being an attorney because they like the autonomy of it. They like the intellectual aspects of it. A lot of people enjoy the compensation aspects of it. And so I think it's helpful to find what people are looking for at this particular stage in their life, and just trying to teach them and show them how, if we do things the right way, we work hard and we do the right thing and we do what we're supposed to be doing to develop, they can really achieve whatever it is that they're looking for in life. I don't think being a private practice lawyer is right for everybody, right for every lawyer, but it is a wonderful career, I think, if you have the right mindset. So I've always found you just have to kind of figure out a little bit what people are looking for, and then try to make this work for them, and then try to show them how, if they stay on that path, they'll reach their goals.
So far, this conversation has all been pretty easy. Now let's get into something more challenging. So what happens when they are either not motivated, not capable, or something is just not working out? Like, what do you do then?
Yeah, those are tough. We try to avoid that in our hiring process, but sometimes it just doesn't work, or people change their mindsets. I'm proud that I work with a kind of firm that has a very collegial approach when things aren't working out, in the sense that they give people time. At the end of the day, we all have to be reaching for the same goals, and we all have to be doing our best. And so if that's not right for you, then there's probably not a place for you here in the long term. But I am proud how my firm and how I try to handle those situations, which is opportunities to coach with people to see if we can, change a few ways we're doing things to try to get there. But at the end of the day, we have to have people. I think attitude's really important. We've got to have folks that have the right attitude about their jobs and their professions here. And at the end of the day, if you're not, it's an indication that you're not happy. And so you should be doing something that's driving to you. If it's not here, then it usually makes sense to find that, elsewhere.
So after all these years of doing what I do, I've realized that letting people go is a skill set, and we don't get taught how to let people go. And it's a skill that is critical for leaders of organizations. So they either typically delay it, don't do it, make mistakes around it, and I think we should write a book on it. But for now, I just want to like share with me a little bit about like how you do it. I understand you're very people oriented and you care about them, and I'm just wondering, like, how do you approach it?
Yeah, so if you reach that point where it's no return, I think you just have to be really straight with people, and you have to be clear about it. And what we try to do it in most cases where it's possible is we try to give folks a little bit of runway so they can find something where they might, be a better fit. But there's no easy way. There's no easy way to do it. It's something that that's one of the things that you take home with you sometimes, I think, when you're a leader, because and then you try to be helpful to them a lot. We've had situations where maybe this isn't the right place for someone, but you could see them being very effective in a different environment. And so I always, even if it doesn't work out here, I try to be helpful to them kind of going forward if they're approaching it in a way that's constructive. And so there's no easy way to do it, as Max, but I just think being really honest with people is helpful. And that's kind of how I've approached it.
I really appreciate that. I personally believe that that's the right approach. If you're not happy with them, chances are they aren't happy with you either. So recognizing that it's just not a good fit, and that they need to understand what is the right fit for them, and that if they've had a positive mindset, attitude, or approach, then you could find the right place for them. You can find the right job, home, etc. So ultimately, it's as much for them as it is for the business or the practice to get it right.
I agree, and I'm sorry, Max. Go ahead.
No, please.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's better to figure that out early in your career before you get the big mortgage, before you get the big car payment. As you're thinking through that, I mean, I can definitely see the argument that it makes sense to kind of address that stuff early on, because it only gets harder the longer that it lingers, and everyone's just kind of wasting time if it's not the right place for you.
I'll share if you don't mind. So what I've realized is that there's really like 3 stages that I see clearly that I like to talk to my clients about. So the first stage is recognizing someone is not going to be the right person for your organization anymore, right? So there's steps that happen before that, but at some point you've got to just come to the realization and say, yes, this person shouldn't be here, right? A lot to talk about how you get there, but too many people don't make that decision. Well, they could. Well, just give them time. Well, let's see. Well, let's see, right? You just have to make a decision. This person is not right. So that's step 1. Step 2 is that then you need the exit plan for them, right? Like, what is this transition plan going to look like? Are you going to give them 3 months, 6 months? Is it a 2-week? Is there compensation? How are you going to approach it, right? And then there's the execution part of things, actually doing it, right? Which is where we as humans get all these different emotions and chemicals pumping in our brain that prevent us from actually wanting to do it because it's very uncomfortable, right? But when you can separate it into, let's do step 1, become clear and aware of who should be here and who shouldn't. Step 2, let's create a plan. Then step 3, execute it. Then it's like, well, I can manage that, versus this big cloud of what do I do? So in any case, just wanted to share that with the audience here for a second, because as we're having this conversation, I just realize the importance of that, because there's this thing that I love to talk about with people that are people caring, which is the difficult in balancing loving people but realizing that they don't fit or that they shouldn't be here. Right.
I think that's a great way to look at it, and something that's been helpful to me when you kind of make those difficult decisions. I always try to make decisions based on what's right for the office, not what's right for any individual stakeholder necessarily. And so you're not only needing to be fair with the person that you're working with on that, but also I have to be fair to all my other partners and all my other team members. And if someone's not being constructive or is causing issues, it's my job to make sure that I'm protecting the office. But also, I try to do it in a way where people have, graceful exit and a soft landing, hopefully.
I appreciate that. So you're just sharing that you just came back from a learning opportunity at Northwestern University on the subject of leadership. All right, so I like to ask this question, which is, what is the single most important thing that you learned from that?
Yeah, I think
I'm
what
sure
was
you learned a
wonderful.
lot of things, but I'm curious.
Yeah, honestly, I think what was helpful about that experience and the biggest thing I'll take from it is sometimes you need to get out of the practice, kind of the daily grind of it. It's easy to get sucked into kind of the very important matters that we're working on day to day and the day-to-day issues that come up. But even just getting a little bit of a break, getting out of your environment and having some time just to think and plan. And it helps you kind of recalibrate what's important. What are the most important priorities for our office strategically? What are the things I could be doing better? So I think it's important to just, I would say, self-reflection and getting enough time to really think through things is something that I'll be taking away from that, along with a lot of, we had a number of great speakers that we got to interact with from the Northwestern faculty, and I could extract a couple of gems, I think, from each of them. And I have a nice notebook that I'll get to kind of look at. But I think leadership it's a process, and you're always growing, you're always learning. I don't think many people are ready for it when they get their first charge on that front. And and for me, I had some skills that I think were helpful, but at the same time, you're always learning. And so for me, I'm going to be taking some time, each week to kind of calibrate, prioritize, and just reflect on what's most important for our office, which is not often the thing that's most urgent.
That's a perfect lead way to my new segment, and I'll explain that in a second. So, really important. You're saying the importance of being able to step out of the practice, step out of the business, kind of get away, right? So in my world, we call that a retreat, a 1-day retreat, 2-day retreat, quarterly planning, annual planning, where you actually don't do it in the office. You go somewhere, right? Whether it's across the city or across town or across the country, but you leave that environment and really take a very different perspective, because you're stuck in day-to-day activity and execution. What I also like you mentioned is that leadership is a process, and it is, right? And it takes time to develop, because it's like a skill set, and you get better and better and better. Now, our approach here at Practical Leadership is that there's tools that help you become a better leader, right? And you should take advantage of those tools, because they will expedite it. You don't have to figure out all the different elements of leadership. But one of the other things that you said that I really, really love is and I'm interpreting it, right, but the importance of taking the leap between your performance to the team's performance, right? You're figuring out for years and years how to manage yourself the best way possible. And then you're like, well, now it's not just about you, it's about the best performance of the team.
That's right. Yeah, you become the least important, kind of factor, and it's a big shift in mindset. And it's, in many ways, it's a lot easier to just be responsible for yourself, your practice, your technical skills. But also it's a lot of hard work to work in that role as a leader, but it's also really fulfilling. And it's particularly fulfilling when you have kind of more junior people that are developing, and you can derive a lot of fulfillment out of it, even though it's a lot more work.
Yeah, well, you said something there, right? I'll talk about that for a second, because I think it's so powerful. Because again, you go from working for your accomplishments to then working for other people's accomplishments. And that's one of the places where I see the biggest, I see a big challenge. People have that challenge of saying, but I'm not doing anything anymore, right? It's kind of like going from, being a CEO and entrepreneur to now I'm a coach, and now I'm not accountable for the outcomes, right? I wasn't on the field playing the game with them. I'm on the sideline, but they're executing. And if you can't make that switch from it's my performance to it's the team's performance, it becomes difficult. And one of the interesting things that I found on that front is that people feel like they're not contributing, right? It's like, I didn't make the shot, I didn't make the basket, so I'm not contributing.
It's interesting.
And it's like, no, you are contributing, right? You called the play, you brought the people together, you were practicing and showing them how to make the free throw, but some people have a really hard time kind of growing from years and years and years of valuing their work and effort to valuing how they put a team together and the success and contribution of the team as a whole. And for you, it seems to be very natural. For you, it seems to be something that you just, like it was a good fit, like right off the bat.
It's helpful too, at law firms, at least when you're managing an office, you continue to practice law, in addition to the leadership aspects. So I still get fulfillment from, being a practicing attorney. So it's not as challenging. If I were to give that up entirely, I think it would be a lot more difficult. But, you raise an interesting point too. It's also, I think when you're an individual contributor, or if you're leading a smaller team, it's really easy to evaluate your performance because you're putting the numbers up on the field. You have individual statistics. And I think that as you rise up in the ranks, generally for leaders, it's just a little bit more difficult to quantify sometimes, sort of exactly the role how do you measure a leader's performance and what's attributable to luck versus what it is that you're doing. So it's, or just attributable to general economic factors or whatever. And so I think that's really interesting. There's some comfort when you're just a team player, a teammate. You can very easily, if you're an attorney, you can see, how you did in your cases, what results you got, what kind of a year you had economically, personally. But it's more difficult if our office does well. Is that because that I've steered it in the right direction, or is it due to something else? It's more difficult for leaders to be judged in my view.
Yes, that's an interesting conversation to talk a little bit about how you can actually kind of measure that in some ways, because you're right. Actually, Jim Collins, well, right now it's one of his collaborations that I have here in the back, right? But he talks about return on luck, and it's over the long period of time, we will all get the same luck. We will all get the same cards, right? So if you play poker, if you only play, if you're only sitting down on the table for an hour, you might be lucky, you might be unlucky. But if you're sitting there for hours and hours and days, you're going to get the same hands as everybody else. But how well were you positioned to take advantage of when you get the good cards? And are you in the game? And are you taking advantage of those opportunities? So many times we're trying to evaluate performance in a very short period of time. And I really believe that some of the business leaders, some of the better business leaders out there, right? I mean, when you're thinking about the Bezos and Amazon and stuff like that, when they're starting to say, we're going to measure success in 10-year increments, right? Like, let's not look at the value of our stock today or the dividends. Let's start looking at 10 years from now. Well, how do we do that? Well, then you have to look at other metrics that are not just about outcomes, right? And you start to get it into the feel, the morale of the team, how they feel they're performing, the engagement, and other metrics that are leading indicators to ultimately, that return on luck. So the segment that I wanted to launch here today with you, Nick, is this segment on leading yourself. One of the things that I see in great leaders is that they kind of have a philosophy, approach, a mindset on how they are leading themselves, their life, their world. Sometimes it's like subconscious, right? It's like, well, I don't know if I do anything, and it's just because it's natural to you. And sometimes they are very intentional and they know what they are doing. So what are your thoughts about how do you lead yourself?
It's a good question. I mean, if you're not self-reflective on who you are and what your values are, I think it's hard for you to be able to lead others if you can't lead yourself. So for me, a lot of it is self-reflection. A lot of it's having goals. I've always been very goal-oriented. And I think also, even more important than that, I think it's just kind of focusing on sort of core foundational values that I think are important. And I'm sort of the mind that if you kind of embrace sort of timeless values, character, honesty, hard work, excellence, I think that if you do that as an individual, that's gonna come across to the people that you're working with too. Those sort of professional aspects. For me as an attorney, it's having a lot of professional aspects of the practice of law. And I think if you do that, it's going to kind of rub off on everyone else a little bit as well.
And do you have to be reminding yourself of these values or communicating them? How does that work on like at a personal level? How do you do it?
I think that you should. I think that it makes sense to be very highly self-reflective of those values. And in a perfect world, I would probably do that every day. At the end of the day, I would sort of think about how I practiced law that day, how I engaged in leadership, and what did I do well, what did I not do well. I'm not as methodical about that as would probably be beneficial, but I do think that you need to, from time to time, kind of just evaluate how you're doing in comparison to some of those ideals.
I appreciate that idea of self-reflection, right? I believe that we're going to start hearing a whole lot more about that, because it starts with leading yourself, then you can lead others. And I see a lot of mismatch in organizations between personal values and the organizational values. And many times I believe that there's values that are just not real. They sound good, but they're not real. They're not what really matters. So I guess what you're saying is that when you're doing this self-evaluation on your personal values, and that your organization needs to exhibit them as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's right.
I have this thing where whenever on like leading myself on values, right? Whenever I feel emotion on a decision or an action, I pause and I stop and I'm like, wait a minute, why did I feel an emotion here? Sometimes it's because it's a thought of an iffy decision based on my values, or sometimes it is a empowering belief based on my values, right? And I believe that our body kind of gives us emotions and senses, and if we pay attention to them, then we can stop for a moment and think about, why did I feel like that? Because I don't believe this is aligned, or this could be questionable, not super questionable, just questionable enough, right? So I'm always curious how other people find it. Some find it more intellectually, some find it more emotionally, some people don't find it.
Yeah, I've always, occasionally you have to make a really difficult decision, and it feels sort of 50-50, even when you're thinking about it logically. And I've always found that just kind of listening to that little voice inside of you in those kind of situations is really helpful, kind of trusting your gut.
Listen to the little voice. I like it. I do believe that there's a lot to that little voice, right?
Yeah, I agree.
So thank you for sharing that, right? Kind of gives us a glimpse of what's on your mind, and how you operate in what values you have, and in how you're also making the practice have those values. Let's shift gears. I'm curious, do you have some tools, frameworks, very specific, maybe books, anything that you use that on a I don't know if an ongoing basis per se? I see that there's there's a lot of sometimes where there's frameworks, tools, books that people have read, listened to, that give them a philosophy, and they kind of go and craft something. But also hey, look, this book has these tools and we go over them, right? Yeah. What would you say is a little bit more of your style, and is there anything in particular you use or recommend?
Yeah, I have accumulated quite a library over the years, and I enjoy reading a lot of different things. And I always try to extract something that's kind of practical from those. So I don't have one particular item that I just kind of draw upon, or that I've totally bought in on from a particular person, but I do think
That's
that you
great,
can.
because we want to hear them all. We've got time.
No, but I think, I'm inspired. Sometimes it's from sports leaders like John Wooden's. There've been a couple of books from him, and I think he was he had unprecedented success as a basketball coach, winning all those championships in great succession. I don't think we'll never see anything like that again from a coach. In my perspective, I've enjoyed his books. I'm a Notre Dame guy, as you mentioned, so Lou Holtz always is somebody that I've enjoyed reading. He's very goal oriented, but there's an endless just grouping of books that I've read throughout my life, and in different situations I'll find myself drawing upon different ones in a tough negotiation. Sometimes for instance, I might draw on books that I've read that talk about how you get through that difficult leadership decisions. A lot of times I'll look at those. So for me, it's just been kind of a constant body of reading rather than a particular tool or framework.
I remember, I don't know who told me this a long time ago, but he said, like, look, when you're reading all these books and generating all this content, it's not that you're going to reference it, right? Like, you're going to be faced with a situation. You're going to say, oh, this book said this or that or that. Not necessarily. You might not even remember it, but it's in there, right?
Yeah,
It's
right.
now part of your systems and your neural network. And you'll draw up on that experience. You'll draw up on that conversation. You'll draw up on that insight. It'll help you make a better decision. And in your world, that decision is a multi-million-dollar decision, right? Consistently, these little things make or break millions, right? I mean, make or break the deal.
Yeah, I think so. And that knowledge kind of compounds, and it continues to build. And if hopefully, I've always been very good about reading, even when I was a young kid. And it's just an opportunity to build that. And over time, even if you're just spending 30 minutes a day, that really adds up significantly.
Absolutely. So let's talk about John Wooden. I mean, he's one of my favorite coaches, right? And I remember reading this, and so just so you know, and so the audience knows, I am a big believer in fundamentals, right?
Right.
Like, I see it time and time again. When something breaks, it's not because you missed the alley-oop, right? Like, it's not because you missed on the fancy play. It's because there was a fundamental that was off.
Right.
And I remember reading this passage where he talks about, like, every season he would get all the players, old and new, and he would teach them how to put on a sock, how to put the shoelaces on their shoes, and how to tie the shoes, right? Even seniors and super seniors, right? They've been there for 4 years, 5 years,
Yeah.
and he's still going after these fundamentals. So to me, that was like, it starts there. What are some of your Wooden, like, favorite stories or concepts that you remember reading?
Yeah. Well, for him, the favorite thing, he had a foundational was a pyramid, and you can find that online, but he lists all these attributes. What I found really interesting about him is he always felt like the games were won during practice and with preparation. And so you would prepare throughout the week, and he always enjoyed practice the most. And he always felt like by the time you showed up at the game, you'd already won or lost that game based on how you prepared. So one of the big things for me was just as a young lawyer in particular was being prepared, spending my time wisely when I had free time, trying to get better, as an attorney. And that's really important, particularly when you're more junior, so that when an opportunity arose, I was ready for it. But I think, kind of looking back on Wooden's pyramid, he had things on there like industriousness, loyalty, cooperation, these sort of foundational elements that he believes if you can sort of practice those behaviors, you're gonna build sort of a wonderful team. But I think you can also apply them even if you're not in a leadership position right now. Just having those kinds of traits kind of builds just really great character for yourself, and I think that it helps long-term success. But he was just such a big values guy, and I think that for him the score really just kind of took care of itself once you practiced a lot of those elements. And so for me, it got me thinking about just kind of focusing a lot of outcomes you can't really control. Things will come up on a deal, or things will come up in business and the economy. So you focus on what you can control, whether it's how you put on a sock so you're avoiding injury, or just because you're behaving in a disciplined manner. But I just think he was a really terrific leader and a lot of great values too.
I completely agree. I love the idea of focusing on the system and focusing on the process, and I think it's being taught more and more and more and more, because you've said it a couple of times, right? Like, the outcomes there's a lot of variables that are outside of our control, and there's a lot of variables that have to deal with timing that is also out of our control. But when you focus on the process, you're going to get consistently good outcomes.
Yeah.
Uh,
You're going
there,
to maximize your potential, and you're going to, and Wooden always talked about that, is that sort of the greatest good is having peace of mind from knowing that you really did your best. You did everything that you could to be the best lawyer you could be, the best accountant, the best doctor, the best entrepreneur. And that gives you a peace of mind, because regardless of what's happened out there in the world or the economy, you can at least, take a deep breath at the end of the day and know that you gave it your best shot. And he actually felt that peace of mind was kind of the highest, sort of the highest value.
it gave me goosebumps when I heard you say it, right? Just what a powerful concept. The peace of mind that you did your best. You prepared the best. You were ready for the game, and you won or lost it before. Absolutely. Now, the only thing that I like to talk about the difference between sports and in business, which I love sports and I love sports analogy. I think it's like a microcosm of the world, and it all happens over a couple of hour period of time. So it's like pressure cooker of life. But in business, you don't get to practice that much, right? You're in sports, you're practicing 98% of the time, you're playing 2% of the time. In business, you are performing 90% of the time, right? And then how many times do we wish we could just call a timeout?
Right.
But the game goes on with or without timeout. But it references the importance of those retreats, of that, taking that time out, being able to assess what's going on before just kind of continuing to play and play and play, self-evaluation and self-assessment, stepping outside the business, being able to look at it, reflect on it, redefine goals, direction, strategy, align everyone, and then kind of get the team back on the right path. So it's kind of like your little halftime.
That's right. And, with law, we refer to it as the practice, the practice of law. And I think that's true. There is some elements of practice that are going on even when we are performing, and more so when you're a more junior lawyer and you're kind of developing your skill set. But you're still learning every day, and even when you're practicing at a peak level, sort of towards the top of your game, you're still continuing to improve. And so I think that's important, and I think it's something that maybe we forget when we're a little bit more senior in the practice. When you're a more junior attorney, everything that you're doing feels like it's new, and so you're developing skills at a very rapid rate. But I think even for attorneys that are in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, the way it works is you've got to continue to improve. So we lose sight of that. Sometimes I think we can get a little bit lethargic once we feel like we've gained some basic mastery. But I think the people that are truly at the top of their game never stop practicing. They never stop learning, even in real time.
It's a powerful concept. I'm going to make a note here before anything else. I noticed that early on when I spoke to salespeople. There were some salespeople that would say, well, I've been selling for 20 years and I already know how to do this and I'm really good at it, right? And then you had these other people that would say, well, I need to get better. I need to improve. I'm reading, I'm learning, I'm trying to figure it out. You got to keep the axe sharp, etc. And wouldn't you know, right? Like the ones that didn't think that they were good, that they thought that there was so much that they needed to learn, that they need to get better, outperformed I've been doing it for all these years and I know what I'm doing every single time, right? Every single time. Plus, they're just more fun to be around. So
yeah, I'd rather have a 130 IQ and think it's 120 than have a 140 IQ and think it's 160 or 150. I think it's helpful to know that you need to continue to always get better and improve. And in my opinion, kind of the lawyers in my world, I work with lawyers, and the ones that are always growing, always taking advantage of their free time to continue to develop. Those are the ones that are going to continue to be great. And you got to grow with the practice too. A lot of things are changing in the legal profession. There's artificial intelligence. There's different things, and those lawyers that are kind of stuck back and practicing law a certain way I just think the world's going to leave them behind, and things are changing faster than they used to, and it's very dynamic. And so I think it's more important than ever to continue to grow with the practice.
So let's talk for a moment on the different ways that somebody could learn and grow. I recently had a guest, and it was the first time I had a guest, a high level leadership. Brad Bellin, shout out for you, previous guest here, and he said that he doesn't, reading is just not for him, and he learns a lot, but in different ways, anywhere from YouTube to learning from other people. He hangs out a lot, in like conferences, and meets people and talks to them, picks their brain, and explores. What are the different ways that you feel it's like reasonable to go out and learn for a young aspiring attorney or an executive at the firm? I mean, you've got more than attorneys, as you mentioned, right? Like everybody has to be developing their skills and growing, otherwise they're going to be left behind. How do they do it?
Well, I think they're living, for folks that don't like that traditional kind of reading method of learning. I think you're living in a golden era just for different opportunities to learn. You mentioned YouTube. We have a lot of in our practice. We've got a lot of subscriptions to things where you can watch presentations on legal topics. You can listen to them while you're exercising. There's a lot of different ways that you can do it. I think the best way to learn is to be here, be at the office, be around people that are practicing at a high level. You kind of pick up not only kind of the technical aspects of the practice, but you also see how they handle themselves with clients, how you see how they handle themselves with opposing counsel. So you get to pick up some even nonverbal sort of cues about how to conduct yourself and practice. So the best learning is clearly, in my view, it's true and actual experience. And I think if you supplement that in some way, for me, it's been reading. For others, it's listening. And for others, it might be going to conferences and kind of more traditional teaching method. But I think whatever it is, as long as you are kind of methodical about it and you're paying attention to it and you're holding yourself accountable, I think you'll be okay. There's so many different ways to do it these days.
Thank you. I appreciate that insight. I think that you mentioned it, right? Like the apprenticeship, the age-old apprenticeship. And one of the things that I think could be a little particular to your industry is that you have the opportunity as a junior attorney to learn from very senior, very seasoned attorneys, because as you said, there's a lot of preparation that happens right before you go into that boardroom, and you can get to see a lot, hear a lot, discuss a lot, right? There might be some other professions where, like if you're the marketing manager of the firm and you're like a 1 or 2 person team, there's not that many people to learn from.
Yeah, that's true.
Right. Or if you're out there in the field and you've got to take action and get things done, there's not a lot of time to, hey, well, let me gather here with the rest of the team and discuss how to plug this in. Right. So I think that it presents a wonderful opportunity, but I also think you have to create those opportunities if you're not in that position. So if you're in marketing, you might not be able to apprentice from, like a marketing structure in your business, but there are peers you could be learning from, right? There are now groups for, marketing people that you can learn from, but you've got to be around peers, which is also the other part that I'm listening.
Yeah, I think that's a great insight. And I always tell when I'm speaking with law students, one of the most important decisions they make is picking the first law firm that they work for or picking the first employer that they work for. And I always think it's really important to pick a place where you feel like you're in the right environment, even if it's not the most money. A lot of times picking the place where you feel like you're going to learn and acquire those skills, and you feel like you have some sort of a connection or somebody that you feel like would be the right mentor for you. That's the most important thing. But yeah, absent being in one of those environments, I think you're right. I think you just got to hustle a little bit harder and be a little bit, more proactive, thinking about how you can develop those skills.
Yep. The importance of that. So we're now at the time where I'm going to try to summarize a little bit about what we've been talking about. And then after that, I'll give you an opportunity to talk about anything that I might have missed or anything that I haven't asked or we've gotten to that you'd like to just, hey, let's talk about this for a little bit, right? So we do have time for that. And I'll let you think a little bit about it as I go through this summary of our conversation so far. So I'm sure you've got a few other thoughts after I'm done with this, but for now, here I go. So I think that it starts and started with when you're young and early. You mentioned that a few times, getting jobs and seeing other people and kind of learning from them and how they operate. Something that keeps showing up time and time again is the selflessness. What is best for the people? What's best for the office? What's best for the team? What's best for the client? And not what is best for me as an individual contributor. And there's a lot to learn from that. We talked about build relationships with clients, and that sometimes in your industry you might not have a lot of time to build a relationship to become a trusted advisor, but when you've worked with them before, when you've known them even before they become your clients, you've built relationships, then it helps expedite that. And then they get to see and understand who you are, what your values are, and they've got to open up to you, because for you to help them best, you've got to be able to kind of get in their mind. And being authentic and caring about people is a key tool, skill, ability that's also very important in your business. We talked a little bit about the importance of loving your clients, and the fact that you got to really care about them and be an advocate for them, because as you become an advocate for them, then it helps you help them best. Building trust with your people, with your team. So it's not just with clients, but it's with your internal team. Told us a little bit about your story about, you've been with this practice for your whole career, if I understand correctly, which means you know the people, you've worked with the people, you've grown with the people, and then there's this trust and relationship. And you said, hey, and you said it, I mean, clearly and genuinely, I don't see myself as their boss. I'm here to hold the team together. I mean, that selflessness in that, right? I'm not telling them what to do, or I'm helping them get direction and keep us all on the same line and on the same wavelength, on the same page, all these different analogies. And you also said you've got to teach people and you got to help them reach their potential. And I believe that's like a core skill of a leader, because it's not about, I need you to perform for me. It's, how can I help you perform for you, right? How do you get what you want out of business, out of life, out of your career? And how do I help you accomplish that? How do you get to know what motivates and drives them? Well, you got to spend time with them, right? You got to spend time with them. You got to know them. You got to care about them, their world, their life. And you said, then you can influence them. Then you can kind of point them. Then you can show them. Take advantage of learning opportunities. And I believe that's such a powerful concept, because learning opportunities are all around us, but unless your mind is looking for them, you might miss out on them, right? I work with a lot of organizations where one of the first things we do is we set up a budget for education, and we actually allocate it as part of their benefit. So when we hire someone, we actually mention it. You have this amount of dollars for your continuous education this year. You can decide what to do with it, right? So, and we expect you to not only learn, but to bring it back to the business. So let's choose wisely, but you've got a budget you can control for your personal development. We talked about the importance of, you have to motivate people, but for that, you got to know them. You got to know what drives them. And you mentioned it very like, oh yeah, it's so simple. But you really said, like, you're playing chess. You've got different people with different drivers, different motivators, different things that they care about. And you've got to understand what motivates and drives each of them. Don't look at them as a group. You've got to look at them as an individual. And when you do, then you can help them individually. And I think that is actually a big mistake, because I see businesses all the time that are like, well, we set up a bonus structure, or we set up this incentive. And I'm like, does everybody care about that? Well, a few people. Or, well, I guess we just assume that they care about that. I'm like, there's other things, right? We're starting to see that with millennials. Well, forget about the bonus. Just give me time off, right? So then we took a little bit of a look at what happens when people are not the right fit. They are not the right person. So we didn't get into depth, but we talked about the importance of a really good hiring process and a good hiring system to minimize the number of wrong hires, but they will happen. So the approach is, when it really isn't the best fit, the question is, what is best for the team? And that helps you make a decision. Then you can take a look at what is best for the individual. And since we're not happy with them and they're not a good fit, how can we help them get to where it is a good fit, where it is right for them. So it's still about the person. It's not just get out of here, you don't work. It's just like, how do we help you be in the right place for you, making it a lot easier. We talked a little bit about some of the value that you got from your recent like learning opportunity, which was to get out of the practice, to get out of the business, to be out of your environment, to be able to see things from a different perspective, and do some self-reflection and self-introspection, which allows you to recognize and be aware of things you might have not. And then it helps you craft your strategies and helps you craft direction. You said something really powerful, which is leadership is a process. And I love that, because you don't read a couple of leadership books and you become a better leader. You read a couple of leadership books and maybe you learn something, and then you implement it and maybe you become a little bit better. So, combining a little bit of what I said, which is like, hey, there's great tools, but there's also great skills that need to be developed over time. And you got to recognize it as a process. And I really appreciate it, because you said, look, you get put into this situation where you go from, I'm an individual contributor that needs to perform better, needs to do more, needs to have better outcomes, to all of a sudden now I'm in charge of the performance of the group. And it's a very different thing, and you got to recognize that. We talked a little bit about leading yourself, and you went straight at what are your values, right? What is important to you? And you mentioned in particular that you have these timeless values, right? Things that haven't changed, and being able to reflect on them. You said that you're a big goal setter, like, so setting goals, knowing what you want to accomplish, setting your intention, and having daily self-reflection to be able to evaluate how you're doing on that path and how well you're sticking to it. And then we kind of got into a conversation regarding like these difficult decisions and iffy situations. And then you said, hey, trust your intuition, right? Listen to that internal voice. We could do a whole conversation on just that intuition and that voice, but you listen to it, and it's a powerful driving source. We talked a little bit about John Wooden. We didn't get into Lou Holtz, but we did talk about a little bit about John Wooden in his pyramid, which is focused on a lot of values, focused on a lot of fundamentals, and the importance of focusing on the process and the systems, and focusing on what you can control, and recognizing that you're going to get outcomes over time if you focus on that. But at the same time, you can't focus on what you can't control. There's lots of things going on, so focus on what you can control. And then this powerful piece. Thank you for sharing that. There's peace of mind in knowing that you did your best, right? The game is won in practice, not during the game. And if you're doing your best, if you're preparing your best, if you're putting in all the energy, effort, focus, collaboration, you did your best, then you can have that peace of mind. And by the way, I'm sure your clients feel that same way too.
Well, I sure hope so. But that was really nice. It was a nice summary.
And then people have to be getting better. The world is changing fast all around us. You've got to get better. You've got to be growing. You got to be changing. You've got to be evolving. Otherwise, you'll kind of be left behind. And you shared, right? Like, there's a bunch of different ways that you can learn. I didn't hear you say podcast, but I'm going to say it. But there's all types of subscription trainings, programs, YouTube. There's a lot of ways that people can be learning. But ultimately, you said, hey, look, the king is the apprenticeship model, right? Learn from the peers, learn from people around you, and you're going to be in a good shape. Probably some things that I missed, probably more than you want to say. That's my summary. What did I miss, whether from the summary or something that I haven't asked you yet that you'd like to share before we wrap up?
No, I mean, I think you hit it, Max. I would just say, from a law firm perspective, as a law firm leader, one of the things that's important to me that we always focus on, there's been a large movement for law firms to be more focused on the business aspects of practice. I don't know if you're aware of this, but thinking things like billing and collecting and more traditional business aspects, rather than the old time 18th century values of just the fundamental practice of law and the professional aspects of the practice. And, to me, it's important that the business aspects are always sort of subservient to the professional aspects of the practice of law. And so something else to kind of think through, particularly if you're working in a law firm environment, is making sure that you're working in a firm that doesn't lose sight of the professional aspects of practice, which is really relationships with your client, always putting your client first, always developing the skills you need as an attorney, not just being someone that has a big book of business, but also always improving technically, just being a real lawyer and really caring about your clients. And I truly believe, both in leadership and in the practice of law, that if you really focus on those sort of foundational principles, everything else is going to take care of itself. And that's what I believe for our office and for our lawyers here and for my practice personally.
I really appreciate that. And of course, they apply to a law firm, but they also apply to business in general. I see it as an and it is an but first things first, right? Deliver high quality product or service, and then take care of the business side of things. If you take care of the business side of things, but you don't have the first part, then you're not going to have a business very long. So I really appreciate that insight of how trends all of a sudden everybody's talking about, as you said, right? Billing and collecting. I hear the word scaling thrown all around us, but hey, let's scale our ability to deliver quality, right? To deliver service. And then we can think about how to continue to grow the organization. So that is excellent advice. So before I let you go today, what is something good, happy, fun, exciting that's going to be happening here in the next few weeks or months that you'd like to share with us?
Goodness, well, I always love the holidays. You know, this is my favorite time of year. If you live in San Antonio, the weather's starting to tilt in our favor. So I just always enjoy this time of year, both at our office as we kind of close out a year, but also just all the personal stuff, the holidays that are coming up. So looking forward to spending a lot of quality time with the family and doing all that stuff that's really important, which is trick-or-treating and Thanksgiving and Christmas for us. And so my favorite time of year for sure.
I appreciate it. Not surprising, right? At the end of the day, it's about family and people. So Nick, where can people find you? How do they get a hold of you? How do they, tap into everything you've got to offer and the practice has to offer?
Well, we have a wonderful office in San Antonio with Dykema, and I always welcome your call, even if we're not the right firm for you. I likely know somebody that might be able to help. And so I've got a lot of wonderful lawyers to help you in any aspect of your business. So always welcome the opportunity to talk.
Excellent. Nick, thank you so much for the time today. It's been a wonderful experience. I believe you've shared a lot of great insights and value for our listeners. I hope we can do it again in the future. Really appreciate your time today.
I really enjoyed it, Max. Thanks a lot.